we were just talking about how long trade's been going in this part of the world. You were telling me.
Yeah.
Yep.
Go on.
In Bahrain?
Yeah.
For millennia.
And I think as AP Moller Maersk, we had our first ship coming here 120 years ago. So this is one of the trading posts of the world and one of the great original ports. So we're really at the home of trade here.
But you've been doing it for thousands of years.
Correct.
So I would have thought you'd have got it right by now.
We do have it right.
And yet, year in, year out, there are crises and problems, Henadi.
I think definitely. I mean, if you look at year in and year out, and in the past speakers, I mean, crises has taken place thousands and thousands of years. But I think the key thing is being resilient and agile, and this is where the region is becoming extremely agile and resilient, and also investing in technology to enable us to smoothen out the supply chain.
Right. Just stay there 1 second, but all three of you. Because the one thing I am desperate to avoid in this panel is going around in circles. All right? So the few ground rules. They didn't know about this before we all sat down. You cannot say how important global trade is. That's a given. Do we agree?
Agreed.
Definitely.
You cannot say how significant the GCC and the Gulf is because you're at the center of it all. Is that a given?
If you say so.
You haven't agreed on that yet. Instead, can we please look at the shifting nature of global trade and the difficulties and how you address them? Because that, I think, you know, I have the advantage of you. I did a panel on this only 2 weeks ago, or last week, so I know the issues. So Keith, what is the number one issue at the moment?
I think at the moment, really the shocks to global supply chain are really, really significant, right? We came out of COVID where the entire world really shifted. This year we saw the Red Sea being closed. And we have kind of naval bombardment of ships with ballistic missiles to the point where we had to shift, the entire containerized trade south of Africa. And yet, global trade grew with 6%.
Listen, I agree with you. I mean, we've been used to trade typically, from the east to west taking place in the past several decades, but now that's changing. It's not simply a retreat from global trade. You're right, fundamentally, trade is not going anywhere, but it's the complete shift of trade lanes and countries and making sure that infrastructure is in place to enable that and to enable with the changing politics that you can trade from anywhere in any country. So look, for example, Brazil and Mexico are even trading more today than it was several years ago because of the change in politics. And you see countries doubling down on infrastructure in these countries in order to enable that.
I would say global trade historically was always, there were different challenges at different periods. Today, compared to during COVID, for example, I would say we're better off.
In what way?
In terms of the amount of trade and the challenges which traders and shipping and logistics companies are facing. So overall trade has gone up. We've seen worse times is what I'm trying to say.
You think we've seen worse times?
Absolutely.
Now, but we come out of the pandemic, and to a large extent, the issue is the trading system just about holds together. Don't get me wrong, you'll still have boats on seas. You'll still move some stuff from A to B. We're not arguing about or discussing that. We're discussing about the most optimal way of doing it. Mm-hmm. And from that point of view, Bahrain's very well situated.
Correct. When you speak about the efficiency of goods coming in and out of the ports, of the sea and airports, I think Bahrain is as you mentioned, in a good position. And we do this in partnership, of course, between the government and private companies. one of which is APM Terminals, who manages our Sheikh Khalifa bin Salman port. But absolutely, I think efficiency of logistics is an important factor for trade.
You said to me earlier, because I asked you, you've been dealing with problems all your time. Is it worse? And you said yes.
Yeah, I think the frequencies of disruptions driven by climate, geopolitical issues, I think this is at a different scale today, and then rather than continuing to admire that problem, what can we actually do about it? And if I give you a practical example from Maersk, one of the things that has happened the last decade is that global supply chains have super efficient, very cost effective, but increasingly unreliable. And at least there's two things that needs to change. One is that we need to create visibility in these supply chains. It's not a very concentrated industry, so actually understanding where goods are when things goes wrong is a problem. That's really what we have learned the last 5 years. And then how do we decouple some of these very large global systems so they are more robust? So when there's no water in the Panama Canal, when the Red Sea closes, when, how can we actually continue to serve global supply chains and trade?
You see, the challenge, of course, is that with those problems, and with those problems, you meet and you come head to head with an immutable object, which is a physical object, i.e., I can't put that boat through there; it might get blown up. I can't put that boat through there; there's not enough water.
Yeah.
And how do you? That's not quite existential, but it's almost impossible.
So our response to this is that we are redesigning completely how we are doing shipping. So we used to have these very long routes around the world where we stopped in 14, 15 ports. So now we are really taking it in smaller systems, and we are doing a lot more transshipment. So if one system goes down, we can move trade around and resiliency around.
So I'd agree with you, and I think the two critical aspects, at the end of the day, you're right. Goods have to move, whether it's shorter distances or longer distance, it has to move. But there are 2 or 3 factors that if you invest in to simplify it. First is you have to invest in agility and resiliency. What does that mean? You have to diversify.
That's not easy, because we're not talking, it's easy for me as the customer in a sense, because I can go to another supplier. But for you and your ports and your ships, that's not easy.
No, it's not easy. It comes at a cost, but it is a necessity going forward. We talk about the frequency of disruptions. It's taking place every 3.5 years. Today, any CEO has to face a disruption or potential loss of 40% of the profitability of the company within any given 10 years. So it's a must, and it's coming at the cost of price in order to be resilient and efficient. And the way to mitigate that is you invest in technology and you invest in your people in order to enable it. So let me give you an example. You may not be able to predict when a crisis is going to happen, but at least you know exactly where your goods are. You have complete visibility using whether it's IoT or tracking in order to be able to make spot-on decisions to make it more efficient.
Yeah, I think you're spot on. Resiliency into the systems really need to build in. I think technology plays a big role here, and I think billions will be invested in actually solving the problem that she points out.
When you talk about the GCC, I know you all want to be friends with each other, but again...
We are friends.
Yeah, but come on. The ports are all in competition with each other.
I think Sheikh Salman made an important point earlier about the pie getting bigger. And so despite the competition, which is natural, the growth is there in each one of the ports. And on the contrary, actually, we're doing a lot more together as a GCC block in terms of integration, not only on logistics, but also on manufacturing, supply chain integration, a lot of joint programs between GCC countries on supply chain replacement, so that today inter-GCC trade is quite low compared to when we look at the EU, for example, which is around 70%. The GCC is about 10 to 15%. And
Why is that, do you think?
One of the reasons is that we export most of the same products, which is the oil-based products. So we're working hard to complete each other's supply chains rather than compete on the same sort of exports or manufactured goods. And one of the things we're doing is we started off by looking at the industrial strategy of each one of the GCC countries and made sure they're aligned so that we're not all doing the same thing.
That sounds incredibly good in theory. I wonder how far that goes before it falls apart on political reality.
I think the challenge is the time it takes for this to transform, because when you decide to build a factory, by the time you take the decision until you actually execute and are producing, you're talking about maybe 4+ years at least. And so this is really the challenge when it comes to manufacturing versus providing a service where you can move much faster. So I would say that's the biggest challenge. I don't see a challenge politically because I think we're all aligned on where we want to go and what we want to do. But it takes time to diversify an economy. It doesn't happen overnight.
And can you work? I'll come to you. Can you work together? Because I know we're going to talk in a minute. Well, actually, let's set the problem up and see if you can solve it.
No, just to build on what he's saying. I mean, we take it from the private sector, and the previous comment of, a rising tide floats all boats. So what we do is we're doubling down within the GCC on all the individual countries when it comes to industrial infrastructure and warehousing, when it comes to aviation and bidding for ground handling. It's not simply one country. The boom in one country floats all the countries, and we're private sectors following their investments within the region.
But you were saying about the difficulties in terms of paperwork. Now, I'm old-fashioned. I do still like to have a piece of paper in front of me, and I don't think I'm alone in that sense. But we're not talking about a couple of pieces of paper, are we, for a container ship?
No, we're talking about 4 billion sheets of paper being circulated at any given point in time in a day to support global trade.
Does somebody walk on the ship and hand over a whole load of papers, and the captain takes the papers and then stamps them, and somebody else hands them to somebody else?
No, I think we have moved slightly beyond that, but not a lot longer. But I think if I can just pick up on the previous panel, we talked about this customs union that is within which I think is a great step in the right direction. The next step.
How close is it to reality?
But so the question would be now the ambition is there, the laws are there. How do you then turn that into a seamless logistics chain? That is a different and more detailed piece of work, and it's not necessarily around more capital investment. It's about process work and bureaucracy, and we know how to solve these problems. So I think that's a really practical way to lower the friction and cost of trade.
So what's the problem?
Well, the problem is that every sovereign has its own customs regime, it has its own laws, and if I want to move containers from China into Bahrain, into Saudi, we're going through multiple jurisdictions. So even though that we have agreed that that's the game we want to do, how do we actually simplify the 4 billion pieces of paper that is moved around the world every single day to facilitate trade?
Listen, that's absolutely true. For example, a white cotton T-shirt can have an HS code defined in, one country one way, and then it's nuanced in another way. And when you put it into system, HS with a space and then a code as opposed to no space. These are like nuances which slows processing trade, quite a lot.
I would say the GCC is one customs union.
Is it an efficient customs union yet? This to what Keith was saying. It's fine to have it on paper. But in your understanding,
I think there are opportunities definitely for more efficiency and more. There are always opportunities to improve, but the concept is there. It's been around for a while. We're doing more on the investment front as well. So joint investment between whether it's investment banks or sovereign wealth funds to allow investments from different countries assists in this efficiency, as well as joint incentive programs. So what we recently did about 6 months ago with Saudi Arabia is jointly recognize each other's in-country value incentive programs.
Yes, I love this because I'm that sad. I really am, that I really enjoy this geekery business, because the one thing I've discovered after, goodness knows, more years than is honest of doing business journalism, that the people at the top can extol great virtues of, we want customs unions, we want free trade, the goodness of blah, blah, blah. But it comes down to, what was it you just described?
The in-country value incentive program?
Exactly. It comes down to the HS number. It comes down to the nitty-gritty. I was sad enough, can you believe this? I was actually sad enough to read one of the last WTO agreements, but on a trade agreement between the US and somebody or other. And I read it right the way down. And these agreements go down to, machinery, 4.6321 meters, weighing X point this, point that, valuation this, with sprocket of 4.2. It's that detailed, isn't it, when it comes to it? Yeah. And it makes a difference from your point of view.
Another thing, Richard, we're doing is negotiate on a GCC level for free trade agreements. We have...
With the EU, for example, with the UK?
With the UK, with now about over 15 different countries and blocks. Last year alone, we finalized 3 with, or 2, and this year 1 with New Zealand, Pakistan and South Korea, and many more to come, hopefully. But in terms of alignment on, when you negotiate a free trade agreement as a bloc, you need to be aligned on what the GCC wants. So I think this, takes the bloc a long way when it comes to there's alignment on strategies. And we've had so far very good success over the past.
Is it difficult to get that alignment, do you think? And I'm not asking you to take you into deep water, but because the GCC at the moment is a hybrid, in a sense. It's got the aspirational goal of FTA, customs union, free trade for a single area, and all of those. But it's not there yet. And it's not quite a sort of ASEAN, and it's certainly not a federation in the sense of the EU. And I wonder whether sometimes on trade you're at risk of not being bold enough and therefore slipping between the stools.
I think the main reason that the intra-GCC trade is low is because historically the focus has been on the oil and gas sector, and we're all producing the same material, which is exported outwards, outside of the GCC. So it's not traded within the GCC. That's the main reason. But also we haven't diversified our economies enough so that we manufacture. We have a diverse manufacturing strategy. Right now, even within manufacturing, some of us are doing the same, manufacturing the same products, whereas we need to be, kind of complete each other's supply chain rather than doing the same thing.
Henadi, when you decide where you're going to send something, how relevant is which port it goes via?
Oh, it's extremely relevant.
But what's the fighting ground for the ports? Is it efficiency? Is it price? Is it transshipment? Is it customs ease of availability? When you are deciding?
I think quite critically, so from our perspective, is we follow the customer. And what the customer prioritizes is between 2 things, time to destination and cost. Those are the 2 critical factors. So if it's time to destination, you have various ports that you need to consider, and then on the back of that, we have various suppliers that we engage with in order to actually move the things for the customer, or price, whether they're price sensitive or not.
So when I want to send 5,000 pairs of shoes from 20,000, 50,000 from Asia to Europe, do you decide the route it takes?
We decide the route it takes depending on your parameters.
That's not helpful.
So I think
Give me the, no,
I'll give
I'm
you-
going to stick with my shoes.
No, let me give you an example. If you say you
His
want
high, the minister's shoelaces. That's a good example. I mean, we talk about these things, but this is reality, isn't it?
Yeah.
Those shoelaces started somewhere. Somebody liked them, buyer liked them. Somebody decided they were going to ship them, and the whole global trade thing moved into. So tell me what.
So if he decides he orders those shoelaces and wants them tomorrow, I'll probably call an airline and have it shipped. But if he says, you know what, I don't really need it tomorrow, the conference is not till 2 weeks from now, I can wait for it, then I'll probably call an ocean carrier and move it. So that's the nuance.
Right.
But I think the way to the customers really shouldn't care. So the transport network of the world is like a utility, like water or power. It is invisible to most, so, and it is exactly the criteria you just mentioned. So what can we do? I mean, we're sitting here in a country that's highly successful. It has really efficient infrastructure. It has meaningful and sensible laws. The question is, how do we continue to attract cargo to us? And of course, the country will consume and export what it needs, but we're also very close to Saudi and other places where we trade. And we need to continue to make sure that Bahrain is the most successful it can, and the friction of trade is as small as it can be. And I think the customs example is a great example.
You use the phrase the friction of trade.
Yeah. It's the $4 billion pieces of paper every day. It is the various laws. I mean, integrating these things is not easy, but it happens seamlessly every day because a lot of people works on it.
I am reminded, though, I'm listening to this, and I'm reminded of what we were saying in the last panel that I chaired, that you're doing it in spite of everything, or despite the problems. You're battling despite the problems. And actually, there's a hell of a lot of things that could be done, relatively low-hanging fruit, that would make it easier.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you think about trade, I mean, it's not digitized. It's not, only like 2 or 3% of trade is digitized. So things as basic as automation works and helps. Things as basic as visibility. Today, companies, only around 12% of the companies around the world have on-time visibility. That's nothing. The rest, 70 to 80%, don't know where their goods are, not till 1 week later.
But the Sultan, we were talking, I visited their facilities. I haven't visited yours, but I've seen, and I'm sure you're similar, the vast amount of money that you're putting into efficiency. I've been in Qatar to Doha Airport, and I've seen machines that'll move things around the airport robotically and automatically. And then all of a sudden, Bill comes along, I need that piece of paper stamping. Would you just stamp it there, please?
I was going to give the example of DP World and how with the same infrastructure or the same goods, they were able to increase efficiency significantly by investment in technology, which for us is really critical when it comes to technology, investment in efficiencies. Bahrain has taken a decision about a decade ago to invest heavily in their infrastructure, digital infrastructure, which allows businesses to come and logistics companies to plug and play essentially. But this is a critical part of leading in the logistics segment.
Before you answer, can I just have a hand mic, please? Can somebody get me a hand mic as well, please? Give it to His Excellency. Just give it to, because I want to take a question and answer from you, sir. You can stay seated for a minute. Just give it to Sultan. You, sir.
Yeah, I want to say that I think we are all investing billions of dollars into technology to try to solve these issues. And the reason why it works today is because of all this. If we need to take it further, it will come down to a couple of things, in my opinion. It's going to come down to stronger public-private partnerships. I mean, we sit with a problem set that is not possible to solve by governments themselves or companies themselves. You know, decarbonization of global trade could be a good example. How do we get all this friction of trade down? How do we build resilience? And this is going to cost trillions. And we really we have a good model actually. The way we got to today, how we build all the ports of the world was based on public-private partnerships. We have really great collaboration models that we can leverage into the future.
Yeah, but I'm coming to you, sir. You're doing all of this despite the problems, the frictions that you're talking about, the difficulties. I mean, I've been covering trade a long time. I want to hit my head against a wall. At what point do you need more help?
Well, as port operators, we consider ourselves like the suspension in a car. When there is a bump, we are the one who absorb it. Now,
but you don't want the bump in the first place, is what I'm trying to say.
Exactly, but you anticipate it. What we do is today, when you talk about digital, the problem with digital is that not every port is ready for digital. Okay, that's an issue. But I think this will take maybe World Trade Organization, somebody who put a decision and said, no more paper.
Thank you.
Yeah, I am sure that when we sit here in 15 years, these things will have been solved, right? I mean, if you think about the technology curve and how fast it's going and the money that's being poured into this, I think we will. It's difficult to imagine where we will be a decade from now. But Richard, what needs to be true? The technology cannot solve the geopolitical collaboration that's needed to fix the form, right? So every country is set up for a world that doesn't exist in the future. And we really need to start solving the engine room of trade to really scale it for the next part.
Do you want the really difficult question now or later?
Later.
Why do you think we can't get that last bit? Why do you think that you cannot, and don't worry, you're going to get this question coming your way.
I'm ready.
You're from government, so I'm giving you warning now. Don't sit too comfortably.
I think we have not solved it yet because the fact is that with the 90% of world trade carried by sea, it is incredibly cost effective. And the cost and friction to trade is simply not big enough to make it a priority at the scale it needs to be. I think this could change.
That's if you're right, that's almost the worst scenario. Because what you're basically saying is, it's a big problem, but it's not big enough yet. Nobody is considering it seriously enough yet.
But I would argue in a world that needs to, for instance, I mean, how are we going to fund the decarbonization? How are we going to fund, all these upgrades of our infrastructure to a larger world and, more trade and do these shock absorbers the Sultan is talking about? All this will cost money, and we need to find the efficiency somewhere. So maybe the time is right to start looking for it.
How worried are you? I warned you. How worried are you that change of administration in Washington and greater protectionism, which is the anathema to everything that you're all talking about? Whatever, I understand you'll live with the results. I get it. But how worried are you?
I'm not worried, I think, because Bahrain, in particular's relationship with the U.S. is very strong, and if the U.S., the discussions we're talking about, which are being talked about, are about a potential blanket tariff on imports, in which case it would be applied to all countries, and we have a few advantages with our relationship with the U.S. Of course, we have our free trade agreement, which is now nearing 20 years, and we have recently signed a comprehensive security integration and prosperity agreement, which talks about several things, including security, trade and investment, but also collaboration on science and technology. So we talked earlier about the potential for nearshoring and friendshoring, And I believe Bahrain is well placed for that. And
You will be the nearshore destination.
I believe we're well placed to be the nearshore, to be a nearshore destination.
Listen, I think tactically, when you think about it, there's nothing to worry about. We're all agile, resilient, we'll figure it out, but that's not the point. Okay, I think the point is the trend. And the trend that you're seeing is with countries focusing not simply internally, but increasing their tariffs, and as you know, similar to the theme we're talking about, the point is today you need frameworks that increase collaboration, not simply to mitigate disruptions in trade, but also to mitigate the geopolitics, to mitigate policies around climate. And what you're seeing is the frameworks that have been in place to protect that and to promote it, like the WTO and so on. I mean, these are being weakened, which, in my opinion, we need to reconsider different frameworks for a future world.
I forgive the name dropping, but I was interviewing this week Ngozi at the WTO, and she's done a great job there as best she can. There's only so much one can actually do in that role. But the fragmentation, the potential for disruption is just enormous. And multilateral trade agreements are dead. I'm saying it, you're not. There's no way you're ever going to get another major multilateral trade agreement. Do you agree?
I think what is important now is that as these sanctions and secondary sanctions are coming, and some of them driven by real concerns like military-grade equipment, I think it's going to be really important that governments around the world is not doing these blanket sanctions that increase the cost and friction of trade. There is legitimate worries, but it seems we need to learn how to navigate in that world and not take massive step backwards.
You gave me an example the other week of just the difficulties of finding out where something's come from and where it's going and what might be sanctioned and what it might not be.
No, definitely. It's not just the difficulty. Look at the cost of it. I mean, you talk about fragmentation, it's going to cost, according to the IMF, over $1 trillion. But it's not these, big $1 trillion of GDP.
Right.
It costs a household in the US, close to $3,000. You're talking about price inefficiencies. You're talking about future generations. At a time when you want EV adoption to increase, it's actually decreasing because of these tariffs and regulations. So, there needs to be a paradigm shift as to how we think about about trade going forward.
If there's one thing you could do, Minister, if there's one change, imagine I'm the fairy godmother. I've arrived with my wand, and there's one change I could make. What would it be? And besides world peace, happiness, and goodness for all.
No, that's what I was going to say.
Yeah. No, it's not a beauty contest. What's the one change? In trade, what would it be?
I think, to me, within Bahrain, within the GCC, industrial integration plays an important role in
Better.
Regional trade. So more collaboration and more integration.
Can you get the godmother in a minute, can you guarantee people will get their Christmas goods on time?
Yes.
Oh, what a brave
because
man.
they're already there.
What about next Easter's? so you've shipped Christmas already?
I mean, there's been a lot of pre-shipments happening this year, and we feel very good about the Christmas gifts this year.
What are you shipping now?
But back to can I get the fairy question?
Oh, fairy godmother, yes, go on. Sorry, my wand. Yes, go ahead.
I really, really hope that we continue to trade and work through these problem sets, right? No. That's
a beauty queen answer. That's world peace answer. What is the one change you want to make?
So we want to make sure that sanctions and restrictions are kept at what is really critical to the world we live in now, and we continue to improve the rest. Because, to your point, it's going to drive down people's inflation. There's a real cost to doing the opposite.
I would say digital collaboration.
Oh, I like yours better. Digital collaboration. You've got integration, you get a bit of that. You get a bit of no more sanctions, except under realistic terms, and you get digital collaboration. And are you shipping my Christmas gifts?
Absolutely.
Ladies and gentlemen, she's put it on the record. Thank you very much, our panel.
Thank you.